Hi everybody, thanks for having me. Hopefully you can hear me in the back. I've been kind of speaking all day, so yeah, this is the last part of the program for me of presenting, so hopefully I still have some voice for it. So my name is Rikke Hovgaard, and used to live in London, so I recognize a bunch of faces here. Recently relocated, but back for some different events this week, and I'll talk to you today about some different query types that we have in CRM Analytics, formerly known as Tableau CRM, Einstein Analytics, Wave, if that's any ring a bell. It's all the same product, just kind of evolved with some new features along the way. And with me, I also have Arthur. So I don't know, Arthur, you can describe or like introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Arthur Fabre. I'm a French product manager working for CRM now. I'm not responsible for all the name changes, so don't ask me.
Do you know who it is?
No, I won't answer. But I'm working. It's been 3 years working for Salesforce on the product side. So we'll be showcasing some of the features that we've built recently or not that recently. Yeah, just very thankful to be here. Hopefully, I can help answer some questions if you have any. If you have feedback on the product, don't harass me too much though. It's been a long day, so. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I kind of assumed you, or I just kind of jumped straight into it. So I'm actually also in the product team. I'm not a product manager, so I don't have any responsibilities for product. I'm gonna kind of direct you either way here. It's not gonna go to me. I do work a lot in our analytic or in our center of excellence, where we're kind of helping with some of the most complex use cases, develop some best practices and that sort of stuff. So today, we're going to be talking about some queries and trying to give you a little bit of different samples of the different query types that we have. And I'll try and also show you live, let's see how that goes, how well my brain is functioning at this end of the day. With these different query types that we have. And also, for those of you who know me, I can't not introduce a binding, so I figured why not add in a binding with our SQL functionalities. And then lastly, I want to hand over to Arthur to show some of the new features that we have coming that I think a lot of you will appreciate. So let's just go into it. So we have several different query types within CRM Analytics, and here you can just see four of them. There's one more that I want to highlight, but we have to use one later. So let's just take these first, and I'll add to the last one. But it's not so fun to show because it's static. So yeah. Anyway, so hopefully you can see in the back as well what's showing up here. So the first one that we have is our compact form. This is what is using our data sets and when we're querying directly on our data set. Now, data sets are basically tables of data that we have within CRM Analytics. So instead of querying objects directly, we're querying this data set, and that we're doing because of scale. I'm not going to go into too much of the reasoning behind. If you want the whole technical explanation, find me afterwards, and I'll give you a more deeper dive into what's the power of data sets. But essentially, our compact form is what you're getting when you're looking at creating your queries through the UI. I just want to go ahead and if we click here and show detail, we can go into our inspector and we can go ahead and see more details. And hopefully, let me see if I can zoom in on this one. This is how we are looking at our compact form, how our queries are looking. So you can see this is a JSON format, where we're basically just looking at the measures, the grouping, the order. If you have limits, those elements that are part of the query, they're all added in this JSON format. Now, at the runtime, we don't really care about the JSON format. We're actually converting this into SAQL, which is the Salesforce Analytics Query Language. That name has not changed throughout the whole thing, so that's still the same thing. And you can see here how this is being converted into SAQL. This is the final query that we have. Now, if we look further as well, we have this SAQL query down here, and this is essentially doing the same thing. So let me just actually go back up here. And I think I was smart in the way that I started naming it. You can see here when we look at the original query and when we look at the final query, there's not much different other than we're having the IDs that we're referencing to up here in our load statement. And I'll talk a little bit more about what each one of these different things mean once we go into building the SAQL example. The next one that we have is we actually also have the option to do SOQL queries. This we don't call SOQL queries. It's very confusing. But when you're in the UI, we call it Salesforce Direct. So we can go ahead and create Salesforce Direct query to query data directly in from our Salesforce objects. So we are probably, or we're more likely talking about live data here where we have a little bit of a delay when it comes to our data set. So if we look here, again, let's see. Now I actually ended up having too many, so let's just go ahead and click here. This is easier for me. If we look at the original and when we look at the final query, you'll notice here that this is, hopefully for you that have worked with SOQL before, just simple select industry, take the count, and we're going to group it, and that's what we saw in our chart here below or before. Now we also have introduced other ways of adding in data to CRM Analytics. Obviously, we have all of our connectors that you can bring in. And you can leverage from a data set point of view. But sometimes we're having customers that want to access data directly in Snowflake or directly in Google BigQuery, and that's also a possibility with our direct options or direct queries. Recently, we also added SQL functions, or so you could switch over to SQL and query your dataset data as well. So from an onboarding point of view, if you're familiar with SQL, it's a lot easier to kind of come in and start creating queries on a CRM Analytics level. So if I go ahead and say show details for this one, you can see here I created a query, very simple again, just using SQL to go ahead and look. In this specific case, it's actually looking from our data set that is called account 69. Apparently, we've created a lot of templated apps in this specific org. So this is also an option for you to do. And later, I'll show you with the direct for Snowflake how that actually works. So hopefully this makes sense in terms of the different query types that we have. As I mentioned, we also do have static. I'll show that in a little bit in one of the examples, how that works. So let's go ahead and look at some SAQL examples. I wanted to show you two different examples here. And the first one, let's go ahead and click on Edit. And you can see here I have my query down here. This is actually, like, oh, sorry, just let me go back to this. The idea is, what I want to do is I have here all the opportunities that are listed in this specific data set. So this is the opportunity name. Now, and this is also having the sum of amount. The thing about this is I could have a very long list of, let's say, 2,000 records that I just keep scrolling, and I'm not really interested in this specific use case. I want to be able to look at the next page, and then I want to show a different query that is having an offset. In order for me to do that, I'm going to go ahead and do a SAQL query. So in this specific case, you'll notice here if I click on the next, I'm now going on to the next page where we're having that offset. So let's have a look at how we can do this. I have to go in and edit this component because I created this in a component widget. So this is my component, and you can see I have two different pages here. I already populated just because in case I fail, I have something to go back to. But the idea is we're going to go ahead and create this second one that we have here. So essentially, the easy way to do this is we're going to take the first one, which has the actual query, and we're going to clone that, and we're going to go ahead and make our modifications. I always say when I work with SAQL, I do as much as I can in the UI, just because that way you get as much as the syntax as you need. and then you can always modify it later. Also, one thing to notice that once you start going SAQL, you don't go back. By that, I mean that we're actually switching the underlying JSON, and so the UI possibilities kind of disappear, and we can't modify the UI anymore, so we have to either recreate it from scratch, or we will have to forevermore modify it in SAQL. So just keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and clone this. And as you can see, we have our sum over here, and we have our grouping here. So we're having sum of amount, and we're grouping by the opportunity name, as I said before. Now, I also have added a filter here just because I found out this data set had negative values, and it started screwing with my chart, so I decided, okay, let's just put that in. I think in most cases that wouldn't actually be there. It's just the data that I have in this specific org. You also notice down in the UI, I added a limit on the query, so I'm only showing the top 10 because I've sorted in that order. In order to go to SAQL, I'm going to go up to this query mode in the top right, and I'm going to click on that. And you'll now notice that this is where we have our SAQL editor. So the first one is basically just saying we need to load our data set in, right? So in this case, it's called the opportunity rep insight 1. And then the next thing is we're saying this data set, we're going to filter it by amount where it's greater than 0. So this is that second line we have here. In the third line, we're going to go ahead and do our grouping. So unlike when we have SQL, we don't actually have to do a select first. We're just saying this is the grouping I want. And in this case, it's going to be the opportunity name, which is just called name over here. Then I need to project the values. And in this, I have my for each statement down here where I'm saying my name as name. So this is what we're going to call it down here. And then sum amount as sum amount. So this is what we're getting here in this case. And then we have our order statement in line 5 and 6. We have our limit. Now what I wanted to do is add in that offset. So what I'm going to do is create a new line 6. I'm going to have Q, because we're referencing the line above, offset, or we're calling this stream Q, and then we have offset, and we're calling Q from the result before, and we're going to have this as 10. So essentially I want to start at result 10. And then finally I'm going to limit this, so again I'm only going to show the 10 results after the offset that I have. So if I run this now, doesn't work because I forgot to have my semicolon. I always do that, so there we go. Let's go ahead and run that again, and then you'll notice that I have my working query down here. We can go ahead and change this to a chart type, of course, and then we just go ahead and click done, and we can add that in here. Now I already have it, so I don't have to add it in again, but this is how we are working with a simple SAQL query. All right, I wanted to show you something else because one of the things that differentiate a little bit from SQL and is our grouping functionality. So in this specific case here, I'm just going to go ahead and open this up and not really go into too much details around how I'm building this from scratch. But I do want to say for this specific case, I did use the UI to do the code grouping, so there's no reason for you to go ahead and write it all from scratch. We do have UI capability of joining different data sets into one query. By the way, one of the great enhancement that I've loved over the years, so we actually have to not have to write SAQL for this specific use case. Let's switch to the query mode and let's have a look at this. As you can see here, I have 2 different data sets that I'm loading in. So I'm loading in an opportunity data set. Yep, question? Yep. I need to not be in the editor. Actually, let's do...
That's fine.
That's fine?
Or if you put it on full screen? Oh, sorry.
Let's see.
Just
Not sure how much that's doing, but hopefully, yeah, okay. So as you can see here up in line 1 and 2, we're loading in 2 data sets. So we have our Q1 stream and we have our Q2 stream, and we're taking in opportunities and we're also taking in cases. Now the next thing that we're doing is similar to before, where we have our grouping. Now we're going to do a co-grouping. You could technically also just put group here, we'll do the same thing. But essentially what we're saying is take the account name from the first opportunity data set here, because we have Q1, and then we do a full join, and we are adding then doing a join with our account name from our second data set, which is our cases data set. Now, what I want to highlight here is this is a grouping. So we're joining on the group level and not on the individual row level. So very important to remember that here we're actually first grouping each of our stream by account name, and then we're joining them together. So we might lose some aggregate or some row details in this scenario, or we will do that. We have different functions or options here. We can do an inner, left, right, and also, of course, this full join type that we have. Now, in the fourth line, again, we're just having our projection. The interesting thing here to mention is we have our coalesced. So in the case where we don't have any account names with cases, or any account names with opportunities, then we want to just take the account name that we have available. That way we don't start having any blank values of account names that are not there. So this is just what take this value from opportunities first, and if you don't have that, you're going to go ahead and take the account name from the case data set. And we're just going to call that account name. And then we have, of course, the number of opportunities. That's going to be the count of rows. So how many actual opportunities do we have from each one of our data sets? And that's what we're projecting in this number or these measures down here. And again, similar to before, we just have an order statement, and then we also have a limit statement. So these are just some like simple queries that we can do. Obviously, I'm just looking at Matt there. I'm sure you have very, very complex SAQL queries in some of the queries that you work with in your applications. And to be honest, I've seen very advanced stuff as well being done here. But this is just to kind of give you a flavor of how our SAQL language work. All right, I'm gonna not save that. And let's go to preview. So we also have the option to, as I said, work with direct querying, not only from our Salesforce objects, but we can also do it from Snowflake and from Google BigQuery. And I think, Arthur, are we GA with the CDP or?
Not yet, I don't think so.
That's still pilot or something, yeah. So we're working also of bringing this to CDP, not there yet. But yeah, so you can see we're kind of like trying to make sure that we have all the possibilities of getting this direct data. I of course want to say that when we're dealing with direct data, there's always a performance thing that you have to keep in mind. So just because you can do it doesn't necessarily mean it's the smart thing to do it. Now, as you can see here, there's a couple of different things. I tried to take a screenshot of what we actually have to do. So the first thing is we have to go into our data manager, and you can find that down here in the data manager. We have our connectors, so we have to go to the connections, and we can go ahead and create a new connection. And in here, it's not called, yeah, it's called direct. It's not called live. I always kind of like mix those two up. So you can see here, these are the direct connectors that we have available. You go ahead and set that up. And then you'll go into your data sets and you can start creating new data sets, and you'll create the live versions here. So essentially what we're doing is we're just saying these are the different objects that we're bringing, or sorry, fields and objects we're bringing to making available. And then we can reference them in our dashboards. So in this specific case, we've just taken a simple data set. To be honest, I have no idea what it represents other than I chose some order status. But just to kind of see that this is actually working. So if I go in here, you'll notice it's just Similar to the regular data sets that we have in here, they're available. If I double click this, I can go in and modify. And notice this is actually the UI. I don't have to go in and modify SQL, but I can also, of course, switch it over to the query mode, and you'll notice it here. Do you have some?
Yeah, one thing
feedback?
I would highlight is there are some features like when you switch to those live queries, we're not at the parity level, right, with normal queries. So you'll see features that are missing, right? Like if you go back to the normal screen, like the join that you can usually do on the left side right next to the dataset name. So it's not here, right? So there's a number of features that we're working on to make sure we get to parity on those features.
So yeah, that's just another way of getting data in, and that's a different type of query that we're dealing with here. In this case, it's SQL. So leaving that, let's preview. All right, who knows what bindings is? Few? All right. So bindings in CRM Analytics is a way for you to connect different queries together. It could also be a query and a chart. So typically when we're working with CRM Analytics and you click on something, other widgets are reacting to it. That's what we call faceting. So this is just generic behavior that once you're clicking on one query that's powered by one data set, let's say opportunity, and you have other queries on your dashboard that is also powered by opportunity, we are applying that selection as pre-projection filters on other queries. So essentially what that means is you make one selection and we're filtering by that selection the other queries. So if you select industry, everything else is then being filtered by that specific industry that you have selected. Now, sometimes we want to do more advanced stuff, and maybe we want to switch out different groupings. So in this specific case here, you'll notice that I have one query here and chart that I want to go ahead and switch between either industry or account type. Right now it's not working, but let's go ahead and look at this binding. To make this even more interesting, at least for me, and I think a little bit new for those people that have seen bindings before, is this query is actually a SQL query. So we've had scenarios in the past where we wanted to bind to SQL queries, but we didn't really support those formats. So the team has been building out SQL data serializations to go ahead and support that this language. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is, instead of doing this in SAQL or compact form, which we normally would do in most of the binding examples you've probably seen in the past, we're going to go ahead and use some of these new SQL serializations. So I'm going to go into my edit mode, and we're going to use the advanced editor, which I know Arthur is. He's happy that I'm using that one. Sometimes I just like write it out by myself because I don't know, I'm weird like that. So we're going to click on our. Actually, sorry, before I do that, static step. I mentioned I was going to talk about this. This is actually a static step that we see here that is just represented in a list widget. If I go over here, you can notice down here in the bottom, I have this that is called static step. Let's just go ahead and preview this. Actually, this is probably better to go in the edit mode. So this is essentially just a static table that we can reference in our binding. And so what I've done here is I have 4 columns. The first one is display. This is just what you see in the list before. Then we have expression, alias, and group. Now expression and alias I have because when you're doing SQL, you have industry as industry, right? So that's your expression and that's your alias. And then we also have our grouping where we say group by industry. So I need to have those references and I need to be able to bind to those. So that's why I have these different elements here in my static step. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the query and the chart and go to my advanced editor. Sorry, it's a little bit compact here, but hopefully I can explain everything and it still makes sense. So at the top here, we have two things. We had our widget and we have a query. Anything that you see represented visually on our dashboard that is powered by a query is going to have these two things. We have our widget that controls all the widget properties, and then we have the query that controls all the things around our queries. So let's go ahead and check the query out, because in this specific case, I want to go ahead and modify the grouping, which is part of my query. So you can see here I have this in line 6. I have this whole one line of my SQL query from before. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're using the advanced interaction builder over here to our left to kind of make this more easier to explain. So the first thing that we're going to look at is saying, where do we want to grab selections from? So we have that list widget where you have to make a selection. What is that called? That's our source. So in this specific case, I know it's just called static, and so I'm selecting that. And you can see over here the created interaction, also known as bindings, is then the current output of my selections I've done over here to my left. And so you can see this is going to change as we go forward with this binding. Now from this static, remember I had those different 4 columns. What do I actually want to bring over? What is it that I need to use? So in the source data, I'm going to go ahead and do a row. And the reason is I want to take several different things from within that row of from my static step. I'm going to take the first row because I'm always expecting one thing to be selected, and I'm going to grab that one thing, and I'll be starting our values at 0. What columns do I want? Well, I'm doing a select statement here. If I didn't say that before, that's what we're doing, by the way. So I'm doing my select statement. So this is where I have to say industry as industry. So in this case, I need to have my expression as my alias. So I'm going to first select my expression, and then you can actually select one more, which is then going to be the alias. And you'll notice down here those have been selected. And you can also see how does this actually look right now. FYI, if you wanted to have multiple selections, you can also do that. In that case, you want to make sure you don't have the row as 0, but you want to have this as all. So if you're expecting multiple selections, you want to change that. You can also just have all. It doesn't really matter, even if you have one. But do know that if you have multiple selections, only have a row here, only ever one thing will be selected and added in. Just an FYI. And that's going to be the first result that you have. Down here, you can actually see how this binding interact, or sorry, this is a little bit cramped, so let's just look at this. You can see the output of this right now. I do want to go back, so I'm going to just scroll up and go back here. And we have different things. So we have an interaction type here we have to change as well. The interaction type is, what are you expecting from the end user? Do you want them to do nothing and you automatically want to take the result and put it in? Or are you expecting to make a selection on the dashboard, an active selection? In this case, we want to have an active selection just because we have that list where you have to then pick which one of them do you want. So I'm going to go ahead and do the selection binding, and you'll now notice that that's been added in here. The data serialization, so sorry, what we've been doing now is all of this. This is our data selection. Data selection is what we're taking, what source are we taking, what data from that source are we bringing with us over. Now that's just coming in this format here. Now, as we know from a SQL query, it has to be industry as industry, right? So how do we convert that? That's how we use our data serializations. Data serializations take the input and convert it to an output that is accepted by the query. So down here, there's more option. If I take that out, you can see here I now have all these SQL options. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and set the as SQL select, and you'll now notice that we have our selection option down here. So this is the correct result that we're trying to mimic. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to put that in instead of industry here. I'm going to paste that in, and now we have our selection. Now we do have to have our grouping as well. So similar to that, we have to go ahead and do another binding. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're still going to have the static, but in this case, I'm not expecting multiple values to be passed over. Before we had the alias and the expression. In this case, I just want that grouping, right? So I'm going to do, in this case, I'm going to do a column. You could also have done cell, I believe. But I'm going to do the column because, again, if you have multiple selections. And I'm going to choose that group column that we had. So if I just quickly preview this, this is essentially what I grab from that query or from that static step. And again, it has to be a selection. In this case, we don't want it to be a selection, SQL select. We want it to be a SQL grouping. And you'll now notice that this is here. However, notice also we have just industry. Well, this is great. However, we can also do another thing which is really great, especially when you have multiple different selections in your source. So if I click on this edit, we can also go in here and say true, which is a Boolean that basically says, do you want to have this this here in front of our statement? Do you want to include that, or do you not want to include this? So in this case, we're going to include it just because we can. And we're going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to remove, of course, in this case, I don't want to have group by twice. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that and paste this in here. Now, I can click save. It's not going to completely work because we have this fun thing that is called column map. So I want to make sure that that has been set to null. The reason for that is column map is saying, what do you want to show in which axis? So it's going in and making references. But once we're making changes to those references, you know, we're going to fail. If it's expecting industry, but we have account type, it's not going to be able to parse that. So we're going to go in, and I always just do a Command F and say column map. And I then have to see, and this is where you can see industry and referenced. Sorry, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here because I want to make sure I'm actually removing the correct part. And we're just going to put in null. This is also referenced in the widget, so I'm going to go to this one as well and say find column map. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of that. One. Hopefully this works. But no. And now let's go ahead and save. And go ahead and preview. And fingers crossed, works. There you go. So this is how you can then swap out different parts of your query to make it more dynamic and make the end user have more choices. And Arthur, do you want to talk about OA Direct?
Yeah, let's do it. Did we lose everyone, or are you just...
Does this make sense? Yeah? Else find me afterwards. I can do bindings at 3 a.m. in the morning, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just asking because I know you asked, you know, who's familiar with bindings. So if people are not familiar, or if like some of the stuff here didn't make that much sense, like, you know, there's a lot of resources online, including a lot of them that this person right there wrote. So
if you want to do anything with SQL bindings, sorry, right now the only way you can find is on my blog. So done quite a lot of webinars as well. So any of that, happy to share it.
So the last feature I wanted to showcase really quickly is, because we were talking about all those different sources where you can bring data from. So one of the sources that we're investigating and looking into building is actually one of our own. So some of you might be familiar with operational analytics, so reports and dashboards that, you know, are kind of the free version of analytics for Salesforce. And so what we wanted to look into is, can we have an easy way for our users to bring the data that they've probably already built, right, inside of those operational reports, bring that directly into CRM Analytics. So two main reasons why. Well, one is it saves you a bunch of work that you've already done. Second one is, this is a very popular request that we have from our users, is this is live data, right? So in CRMA, or Tableau CRM, as you know, there's no way to really have live data. If you want, you can refresh the data as much as you can, but it's never going to be like the latest. And so using this feature, you're actually able to query the reports and run it, and so it's actually pulling up the latest and live data that you have on your reports. Some of those are the main reasons why we built this. So right now it's a pilot, but we wanted to showcase this. It's going GA in the Winter 23 release, so at the end of the year for you guys. So this is the new home. Right now, you guys don't have, this is not the pilot, so you see when I was just looking at this view, so in the new home that we're building, we're adding a lot of new assets that are all the operational analytics assets, which is why you're seeing, like, if I click on the dashboards, I can see lightning dashboards or Tableau dashboards, so a lot of new features coming, and this is also why you see your reports, right? So if I click on the reports, those are all the operational analytics reports that are created in this org. And so here, I've actually not prepped fully the demo, so I'm just gonna cross my fingers and see what this one is about.
So this new unified home is actually something that is going to be available as a think beta. You have to go in the settings and enable it, but that's already from this summer release that we were just told is coming. Was it June?
June
3rd?
June
Yeah.
3rd, and then the weekend after, I think it's
May 20th, and then June 1st.
and June 10th. Is that 7 days later? Yes.
Well, once you wake up in
5th of
July,
summer.
this is going to be a possibility. Let's just put it that way, right?
All right, cool. So this experience you probably don't have access to yet, right? But that's something that we're able to do in the new release, where you're able to open reports within the CRM Analytics hub, right? So in there, I didn't go, it's not a landing page, right? But you're able to have one place to consume all your analytics assets. And so I've just opened it up, and so what I wanted to show to you is now I'm going to bring this reports that you're looking at inside of, so actually not the chart part, but the table part, right? So with a bunch of different groupings here. So we're grouping by all those opportunity owners. This has subtotals and all that. So hopefully this should work. So the way you do this is very basic, right? Once the feature is actually enabled, you will just create a query like you would for a normal query that you want to build based on datasets. And you see here, there's a new tab which is called Reports. When I click on this, it's returning me the list of the reports that I have recently accessed. So this is one of them. And so if I actually click on this guy, it has created now. It seems like nothing happened, but at the very bottom here, you see this opportunity report that has been created, and you're able to actually just drag and drop this query like you would with any other one. So right now, by default, it's actually being viewed as a table. A couple of really cool things that this is, oh, I touched something. I messed it all
See,
up.
Rikke made sure to create the demo codes before.
It's back.
You obviously
It is back.
I thought it's back now.
All right, that's good. Don't touch it. All right, not touching anything anymore. So one of the opportunity that this is bringing is when you're looking and leveraging the operational analytics tool, you have a lot of limitations around filtering. You have limitations around the different chart types. So the benefits of being able to embed those in CRM Analytics is I can embed this into any chart type, right? So obviously it depends on how the data is structured. In this case, not like a normal bar chart probably wouldn't work because there are different types of groupings, and so it's a bit trickier. But we're working on making it possible for you to have the same query show up in different chart types inside of CRM Analytics. So this is really quickly what I wanted to show to you. So obviously in operational analytics, there are different types of reports you have. So you have the equivalent of values table, which is just a bunch of fields. You have matrix reports that are the same as compare table, where you have one grouping. And then so those two are currently supported. And then for the GA, which is coming up in winter, we're making sure that the pivot table example is also supported. So we're working on making sure there's parity between both of the features, because what we want to make sure is that you guys' expectation is when I'm using this, when I'm going from my report in this table view, it should look the exact same here, right? That's the biggest expectation. We're working hard on making this possible, but there's a bit of work left. So.
What about editing?
Editing what? This guy?
Inline editing.
No, come on. Like my boss is asking me questions. But this is a good question. So there's a lot of features that exist in not a lot, but there are a couple of features that exist in operational analytics, including the inline editing, which is a really cool feature that came up recently. That is definitely something we would love to have and add on top of this. There's other ways to achieve it. We talked about it today. Completely different topics using like other LWC components and custom code and more complex things. Happy to talk about it, but for now, like this is there's some stuff that are not coming out of the box, right? So there's certain limitations. Another one is like for pivot tables, for instance, in operational analytics, you can have multiple groupings across, like meaning horizontally. In our tool in CRM, we don't support that today. So the way we would do it was just flipping the table, right? So we'll have all those groupings work vertically. So it's just a detail, but again, when you're going to be converting it, it will look slightly different. So.
What happens when we go to the advanced editor? Can you do any bindings?
That's a great question. So this is just a reference to the report that's being run. So meaning the data is not actually on our side, right? So CRMA here doesn't have a view on all the existing field. We don't understand. So you can't build a binding, for instance, that's referencing like the account name field because the dashboard doesn't have a view inside of it. This is something that we want to do in the future. It's actually much more work, but it's something we can do, right? And so right now, our goal is to get this feature out to everyone so that we can collect the feedback and understand, like, what are the top 3 things that is missing that you really want to do, right? Maybe you want to do like bindings, and then she wants to do inline editing. So it's kind of a matter of prioritization, right? But yeah, like right now, if I try to double click this, like you can't edit it, right? It's not. So when this is gonna be GA, the new home will also be GA, which means that when you're double clicking this query, what we want to happen is actually just opening the report type in Studio. So you would be able to go in there, edit this guy, save it, and then when you go back to the dashboard, it's going to be like the latest version. So you would have some way to edit it, but there's like, for now in the palette, there's actually not, like double clicking this just doesn't take you there, right? So small things, you can just go back here, edit it, and then save it. But yeah, it's a great point. It's a nice enhancement.
Did you say it was just tables at the moment? You want to do like the inline charts?
And so you can have like any type of visualization that exists here. So like it's probably not going to work because the table is quite complex above this. So if I have a chart widget and I try to drag and drop this guy, like I know it's going to fail, right? So because the mapping is not exact, right? So like in this guy, you have a bunch of different fields and the groupings are like specific, so I would need to go in the query here and probably in the widget chart type, and I would have to see like which ones is actually mapping. Like in this case, there's none because this is like kind of grouped in a specific way, right? So this is where it's a bit tricky because you can't edit it, right? You can't open an Explorer panel and look at like how do you map all of those fields properly to have like a nice chart. But you can, if you have like so I think the reporting question is not the best one for this demo or to showcase like this type of stuff, but you should be able to drop this onto other widgets, right? So here, like if I have a list filter, pretty sure this should work, hopefully. Yeah, so in there, like it's picking up the first, which one is this? Full name. I'm not sure which field name this is coming from. Where's the full name coming from? Is it the account name? Probably is. Let me see. So if we go in preview modes, what is this? I don't know what this is. But yeah, I didn't prep this demo too much. Apologies. Actually, this is the opportunity owner, I believe. It was 4.5. Let me check.
Yeah, because full name is, yeah.
So it's picking up, in this case, it has to do with, it's all reporting back to the way your report has been built, right? So if you wanted to actually have like the different types here, you could just go here, change the type to be like the main grouping, right? And then this would come up as the list filter in here. You'd be able to have like the different types. So you're able to use all the CRM widgets, you just have to make sure it's properly configured.
So in your original report, there was a chart at the top, that won't come through.
What's that?
So you had that chart,
yeah.
that can't be displayed on the analytics dashboard?
I think it would depend on, this is really buggy. It depends on the way it's set up. I believe you should be able to do it. It's just right now.
Yeah, I was thinking if it's like
You should-
if you just drag and drop, then
Yeah, it should be displayed the same way. I think you would need to configure the chart widget properly. I think it's not like by default when you drag and drop it.
so it doesn't take the chart from the
Yeah,
operation.
no, it
it's just
doesn't.
taking the data
Yeah.
table behind.
It's different. So yeah, that was all I wanted to show.
Quick question about permissions. So do you only see what the running user can see because Analytics usually doesn't have the same permissions as Salesforce, it has different permissions.
It respects the same predicates. So like security-wise, you would only have access to whatever is user logged in inside of CRM. So I can only see what I have access to. It's following the same security predicates. Yeah.
For the OA.
Yeah.
Datasets work differently. But yeah.
Now, you mentioned that operational analytics. You used the word, every developer likes to hear free. Or did I mishear you?
Yeah, operational analytics is part of Salesforce offering, right?
Okay, well, I mean, as someone who has absolutely no idea of analytics, but I was not even aware of that. So, how would one, for example, add the product to an existing organization to get started with it?
Like OA?
Yeah.
That's a good question. So if you go here in your default Salesforce experience, you have access to a report type, which is not here. Oh yeah, that's right.
Or goes the
So
Just standard reports?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you would have access. So from there, you're able to create new reports. So I'm not going to go through the whole flow.
So there's no separate. So when you say operational, OA just refers to regular reports and dashboards.
Yes.
Okay.
There's
Standard
no like.
reports and
the
dashboard, yeah.
interface looks a bit different on the org.
Yeah. There's no like new features that's kind of in between. So it really is just the default reports and dashboards that's part of the Salesforce ecosystem and all.
So what you saw, the new unified home makes it a little bit confusing because we actually takes all the different analytics assets you have and just have one place of finding it all. So if you only have if you don't have CRM Analytics, you won't be able to see those part of it. You only see reports and dashboard, right? So, but it's kind of trying to make that user experience that, oh, where do I go? I don't know if it's operational report or if it's CRM Analytics. So it's kind of having that one way of accessing all that. We wanted to try and have change the experience.
So quick question. So now imagine, let's say somebody has a big fancy dashboard on this nice big screen like this, right? And you'll have like a lot of different reports. So if I understand correctly, anything this data replication will be lagging, right? Because they will be querying, let's say maybe once a day or whatever, right? So will there be an indicator if we pull standard reports and dashboards, they will be live operational data, right?
Not
And
within
then
the dashboard.
replication.
Within the CRM Analytics dashboard, we don't portray to the end user. I don't know if there's a plan to portray to the end user. If this is powered by a Snowflake Direct, if this is a SOQL, if this is reports and dashboard, we're not actually, even if it's a SAQL or a compact form, we're not displaying that because the end user, in theory, doesn't really care. I think where there is really a opportunity for you to make a difference in is that expected behavior. If you click on something and something else is not reacting, that really comes down to how do you as a developer or designer or builder, how do you structure your dashboard in a manner that makes sense? So we actually had a whole session earlier today about UX design and how really you need to think about what are you trying to achieve and how is the best user experience going to be, and then build it up around that. So if it is saying, well, some of it is going to be live behavior and some of it is not, maybe it's separating it out on the dashboard, having different pages so you kind of know what is the expectation here.
It's really up to the dashboard author to set it up to say like, hey, you're seeing this visualization, like this is live data, and this isn't, right? We're not like adding like a tag or a color and like Because then like,
because I was thinking a tag or some sort of icon to indicate where,
so that's a great point, right? But then the thing is like, if for you, like you'll know that the green tag means like live data, but like, you're deploying a dashboard to thousands and thousands of users and they're just confused, like this one has a blue tag, this one has a green tag, like then you need to teach them like, so in the end it's almost just as easy as putting like a text widget saying, this is live data.
And where is it coming from and what does it represent?
Yeah. And to be fair, it's a great point, right? Like I was with a customer last week and they were actually like, they thought this was a cool feature, but they said, we really don't want this in our dashboards because our users know we don't have live data and we don't want them to be confused and see like, oh, this is live data. And now they're like, oh, do I have live data or is it not live data? Like, and it's next to each other. So almost separating it and having different dashboards or different experiences, I think it might be like better in some situations. And there are cases where we have customers that say we absolutely want live data. And so they might just have a big table at the bottom showing that report live data.
And I think this dashboard builder also offers you more flexibility than the operational dashboard builder. You can start adding in text and all these components as well that is different from what you have of options in operational reports. So it makes it more flexible, even if you wanted to just have all of it live that is coming from report types. That's another question. Yeah.
Is there processing between the operational reporting and Tableau, CRM Analytics queries?
Yeah, you can do it using data source linking. So it's like any data set that's different, right? You need to make sure, like, create the mapping, but you should be able to. I don't know if it's going to work right now because it's demo. So, but here you should be able to create a new connection and actually see a Salesforce report. And in there, you'll see all the fields the same way you would do. Yeah, it's taking time to load, but it's possible. You just have to do the connection yourself.
Okay.
So it's not smart as possible yet. But
does that mean what we saw earlier, the co-grouping? I can co-group from one reports.
Yeah, you would be able. So
works a little bit differently because the co-grouping actually joining two results together and showing that in a chart. However, the faceting is actually just selections that we're adding to other queries as a pre-projection filter. So when you saw that SAQL, so it's typically, or it's right after the load statement, we add in that filter statement. And that's what faceting is. We're just adding it in like that.
So one thing that would be cool, that's another enhancement, right, is to do the co-grouping from the Explorer panel, right? So if I'm here, and I would be able to add the data set that's coming from a report. That would be like the next step, right? That's a cool idea. Yeah, and so we were looking at the different widgets earlier, like things you can do using this new kind of step type. So it's an easy win, right? But you can reference fields that are coming inside of a text widget. You can use dynamic fields that are actually coming from this query, right? So those are all showing up. Similarly, like when you're doing the connection, the data source linking, it should be seeing this list of stuff, and you can just pass it here, and so you actually are getting results on this text widget coming from this new data source. So technically, the way we built it is every widget that we support should be able to support this new step, or new query, sorry.
To say thank you to Rikke and Arthur for